In 2023 alone, Japan's fighter jets were scrambled more than 700 times, almost all to intercept Chinese bombers silently tracing circles just outside Japan's airspace. Armed with missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads, and sometimes accompanied by Russian aircraft, these H-6 bombers exploit a legal loophole only 230 miles from Tokyo. Each approach is a dress rehearsal for disaster that neither side admits to wanting, but how close have these encounters come to spiraling out of control? Every morning, radar operators at Japan's Air Defense Command stare at glowing screens, waiting for the next alert. In the past year, those screens have rarely been quiet. Fighter jets launched more than 700 times in 2023 alone, sometimes multiple times in a single day. Each alert sends pilots sprinting to their aircraft, engines roaring to life, wheels lifting off the tarmac within minutes. The target is almost always the same, a Chinese H-6 bomber, sometimes flying alone, often joined by another or shadowed by Russian bombers on a looping route that skirts the invisible boundary of Japan's air defense identification zone. These bombers never cross into Japanese sovereign airspace, but they trace deliberate arcs just outside, circling the islands, sometimes coming as close as 230 miles from Tokyo. The Japan Air Self-Defense Force treats every approach as a potential threat. Scramble orders are executed with precision. Pilots climb to intercept altitude, close to visual range, and shadow the intruders until they turn away. The protocol is relentless. An H-6 appears on radar, fighters launch, the bombers turn back, fighters return to base. Hours later, the cycle repeats. The numbers tell their own story. In the first quarter of 2023, 238 scrambles were recorded, almost identical to the previous year. By year-end, the total reached nearly 780. Two-thirds of these launches were triggered by Chinese aircraft, with most incidents concentrated around Okinawa and the southern islands. At Naha Air Base, crews remain on constant alert, knowing that at any moment another scramble order could come. This operational tempo is not just a statistic, it is a daily reality for the air crews tasked with defending Japan's skies. Every approach by a Chinese bomber is a test of radar coverage, of pilot readiness, of national resolve. The pace is unrelenting, and the margin for error is razor thin. For the pilots and commanders of the Japan Air Self-Defense Force, there is no such thing as routine. China's H-6 bomber, originally derived from the Soviet Tu-16, has evolved into a modern strategic weapon. The latest H-6K and H-6N variants now dominate patrols near Japan. Each H-6K carries up to 6 supersonic YJ-12 anti-ship missiles, or 6 CJ-20 land attack cruise missiles. The aircraft's combat radius stretches to about 3,500 kilometers, enough to reach deep into the Pacific or threaten almost any target in Japan without leaving international airspace. The H-6N, with its air refueling probe, can stay aloft even longer, extending China's reach across the region. These bombers are not just powerful, they are also nuclear capable. The ability to launch both conventional and nuclear missiles from standoff range puts them at the core of China's strategic deterrent. Modern glass cockpits, advanced radar, and electronic warfare suites make them harder to track and counter than their predecessors. The H-6J, a variant for the Navy, adds maritime strike power, carrying up to 6 anti-ship missiles and expanding the threat envelope into the seas around Japan. But the routes these bombers fly are just as important as their hardware. Chinese crews chart looping paths that bring them just inside Japan's air defense identification zone, but they always turn back before breaching the 14-mile boundary of sovereign airspace. Japan's air defense identification zone stretches out 230 miles from its coast. Inside this zone, foreign military aircraft must identify themselves, but it is not illegal to enter. As long as the bombers stay outside the 14-mile territorial limit, they avoid direct violation of international law, yet still force Japan to respond. The May 24th, 2022 joint patrol with Russia showed how far this choreography can go. 2 Chinese H-6s and 2 Russian Tu-95 bombers flew a coordinated route through the Sea of Japan, into the Pacific, and back again, escorted by fighters at every stage. The entire flight lasted about 13 hours and never crossed into Japanese airspace, but it triggered multiple scrambles and diplomatic protests. Each patrol is a calculated probe, testing radar coverage, response times, and the limits of Japan's patience, all while staying just on the legal edge. The bomber's presence is a reminder the line between routine patrol and real crisis can be measured in miles and minutes. For pilots stationed at Naha Air Base, the scramble alarm cuts through sleep, meals, even moments of quiet. One former Interceptor pilot remembers the routine, boots on, helmet in hand, sprinting to the fighter as ground crews rush to pull covers and ladders away. The clock starts ticking the moment radar picks up an unidentified track, and within 10 minutes, wheels are off the ground. The intercept could last half an hour or stretch to an hour, depending on how long the bombers linger near the air defense identification zone. Once the threat turns back, the fighters return, but the job is far from over. Maintenance crews swarm the aircraft, checking for stress fractures, topping off fuel, replacing worn tires. Pilots debrief, grab a quick meal, and brace for the next alert, which could come at any hour. The cost of each scramble is staggering, between $50,000 and $80,000 per sortie. That figure covers fuel, maintenance, spare parts, and the hours of labor from pilots and ground staff. Over 700 scrambles in a single year means tens of millions spent just on these rapid response launches. At Naha, nearly half of all Japan Air Self-Defense Force scrambles originate from this single base. In fiscal year 2024, the number reached over 300, with Okinawa and the southern islands absorbing the brunt of the pressure. Bases in Kyushu and northern Japan face similar demands, with Fukuoka and Misawa scrambling more than 200 times last year. The human cost is harder to measure. Pilots on quick reaction alert work 12-hour or even 24-hour shifts, sleeping in flight suits, always half listening for the next call. Chronic fatigue and stress accumulate. Aircraft age faster than planned, with each high-speed climb and hard turn adding invisible wear. The relentless pace strains not just the jets, but the people who fly and maintain them. One pilot described the feeling as a constant rehearsal for a disaster that everyone hopes will never come. Yet every time a Chinese H-6 appears on radar, the cycle begins again. Alert, scramble, intercept, recover, draining resources and resolve, one sortie at a time. On August 26, 2024, a Chinese Y-9 reconnaissance plane crossed the 14-mile boundary off Kyushu, entering Japanese territorial airspace for several minutes before turning away. Japan's fighter jets scrambled and issued warnings as the incursion unfolded. Beijing later claimed turbulence forced the pilot off course, but Japanese officials rejected the explanation, calling the breach a serious violation of sovereignty. The event set off a flurry of diplomatic protests in Tokyo and fueled debate over how far Japan should go in enforcing its airspace. Barely a week later, in early September, a Russian Tu-95 bomber flew inside Japanese airspace near Hokkaido. This time, a Japan Air Self-Defense Force F-15 fired a signal flare, a rare visible warning intended to force the Russian aircraft to leave. It was the first such direct confrontation with a Russian bomber in years, and it happened as Russian planes completed a full circuit around the Japanese archipelago, a route not seen since 2019. September brought another escalation. Dozens of Chinese and Russian warships gathered in the Sea of Japan for joint exercises, with Russian President Vladimir Putin describing the drill as the largest of its kind in 3 decades. Allied surveillance networks, Japanese, American, and South Korean, tracked the flotilla, analyzing every maneuver and radio call. The scale of the exercise and the timing so soon after the airspace violations left defense analysts warning that the line between demonstration and provocation was rapidly thinning. International security scholars point to these incidents as evidence of a new phase. The combination of direct airspace breaches, active warning flares, and massive naval drills signals a willingness to test not just Japan's response times, but its policy boundaries as well. Behind the scenes, policymakers weigh their options, tightening rules of engagement, expanding joint patrols with allies, investing in new surveillance assets, or even considering public disclosure of every breach to raise diplomatic costs for Beijing and Moscow. Each option carries its own risks, and none guarantee that the next approach will stop at the line. The trajectory is clear. What began as a contest in the buffer of the air defense identification zone now edges into direct challenges of sovereignty. Each incident raises the stakes, making the cost of miscalculation higher and the margin for error smaller. Each scramble tests not just radars, but the nerves of nations. As Chinese bombers circle ever closer, the margin for error shrinks. In a region defined by vigilance, routine encounters now carry the weight of history, and they carry the risk that tomorrow's rehearsal becomes something no one can rehearse for.